You're not alone. If you are feeling lonely or maybe disoriented after leaving religion, you are not alone. I am a secular chaplain, and for me and for so many of the people I talk with, there can be a real sense of loneliness and maybe grief and disorientation after we've stepped away from religion. And while that decision to step away was the exact right thing for us, there can be aspects of it that feel hard and maybe disorienting, especially if we aren't quite sure what to expect. So I wanted to mention five things, five aspects that you may encounter once you've stepped away from your faith, especially if you've been part of a religious system or a religious organization for a long time. So the first one is that sense of loneliness that really can stem from a loss of community. For many of us, a part of being in our religious organization meant that we kind of had a built-in community around that. So oftentimes that would be, a gathering once or a couple of times a week. There would be gatherings for meals. And a lot of times this would come with people who knew us fairly well and would check in on us about how our days were going, how the week was going for us. And at the time there were a lot of, maybe it felt like good things about that. And there was a sense of comfort, maybe in that sense of community that came along with being part of that religious organization. So when we step away from our faith or away from that religious organization, there can be a real sense of loss of community. And that can leave us feeling quite lonely, quite isolated. And so I think being aware of that, and kind of being able to name that as something that's real and something that we might encounter along this journey, it can be very helpful because it can take a while to find a new community that better fits for who you are now, and what is right and good for you now. And in the meantime, it can be quite lonely and quite isolating. So just know that that is very normal. Um, we can name it as that this, it feels lonely and it feels hard without community. A lot of times, if we can name it, and understand it and know that it's very normal, that can be helpful as we walk through and navigate this new aspect. And another aspect I think that can be difficult for us to navigate, sometimes when we've stepped away from religion, is that sense of relationship strain that can occur. For a lot of us, it wasn't just us that was part of our faith system or religious organization. For a lot of us, that our families members were part of that as well. Maybe our friend systems were part of that religious organization. So sometimes there can be relationship strain if those people who were important to you don't understand why you've stepped away from religion, why that no longer works for you, especially if this is a belief system that still works very well for them. There can be a real confusion, a lack of understanding in relationships that have been important to you, and so sometimes there can be a real shift in those relationship dynamics. Sometimes relationships can fall away even. And again, this can be very painful, and an aspect that can be quite hard to navigate for those of us who, that religious system just no longer works for us, but it still works for people that we care about. So, again, give yourself space and grace as you're trying to navigate that, what could be very tricky aspects of once we've stepped away from our faith. Sometimes we kind of expected that there would be relationship strain. Other times, relationships that can strain that we did not expect um, to have difficulty. So again, this know that you're not alone as you're maybe navigating how relationships may be shifting. And again, being able to give a name to it and know that this is a real and normal thing that can happen. It can be helpful. You're not alone as you are in this new time of what these relationships may now look like. A third thing that may be difficult for us to navigate, a little bit tricky once we've stepped away from religion, is that sense of having to um, kind of rebuild our own identity, um, reconstruct a belief system that is right for us now. Um, Sometimes this can be quite hard, as especially if you've been a part of a faith, a religious organization for a long time. Maybe you've had an identity kind of put on you that was wrapped up in that belief system. Maybe you were didn't really have a choice in establishing the belief system that you kind of carried with you for a long time. So once we've stepped away, it can be for some of us the very first time we've had a chance to kind of figure out our own identity without that belief structure. It can be the first time we've had a chance to kind of, construct what values and belief systems are right and good and real for us now. So be aware that that can be kind of tricky. There can be a lot of joy in in knowing that it's a time of rebuilding your identity and finding reestablishing beliefs that may work for you now. But it certainly can take time, and you may feel a little disoriented in the meantime. So again, just being able to know that is a real thing that certainly can happen, and can be difficult to navigate. It's just important to know and keep in mind. And a fourth aspect that may be kind of tricky to navigate is that sense of having to find and come up with new rituals and ways to mark events and life transitions. A lot of times when we are part of religious organizations and faith systems, that often comes with rituals that kind of are part of that. Rituals and maybe celebrations, ways of marking times of growing up, or marking certain celebrations or certain losses. A lot of times for many faiths, there are very particular rituals that go along with that. So it may be a very tricky time of trying to figure out what, if any, rituals matter and feel good to you now. That may mean bringing forward some rituals from your old faith, and maybe making them into new ways. Rituals that are a little bit of the same, but maybe infused with some things that matter to you now. That may be helpful. Also, disregarding the rituals altogether may make sense for you. So I think it's important to, again, give yourself the space and the time, and that be gentle with yourself as you're trying to figure out, how to mark special events in your life now, ways to celebrate, maybe rituals around grief, um, rituals around, marking certain life events. It may be a time of really figuring out what is important to you about, those things, and what ways would feel special and good for you now to mark life events and transitions. And a fifth thing that can be hard, once we've stepped away from religion, is a sense of trying to find, care or support systems or counseling that is non-religious or that is secular. A lot of times the religious organizations that we were a part of, many of them might have come with their own, religious counseling, or the pastoral counseling in some ways. And so when you've stepped away from, your faith, you've stepped away from religion, you may be seeking support and care, systems of care, systems of counseling that no longer, you know, that are no longer rooted in religion. And so again, that takes time to figure out, where can I turn to for support and care that doesn't, rely on, the religious piece that used to be a part of what I was involved with, but where are there places that are, non-religious and secular that can provide care, based on the value system that matters to you now. So again, give yourself time and space. All of that can kind of take a bit, and may not happen overnight. So just know that these are aspects that you may find tricky, as you're navigating after leaving religion, but you are not alone in that navigation. Um, Many, many, many folks have walked this road before and are continuing to walk this road. So you are not alone on this journey. And just make sure you're caring for yourself and taking good care and giving yourself kind space to figure out what is working for you now, because it may look very different than what worked for you previously. So I hope this has been helpful. Let me know in the comments if there are ways that I can be helpful. My name is Ashley. I am a secular chaplain. And again, you are not alone. Not one single one of us is alone on this journey. So be well and take care. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye-bye.